Okay, earlier in this course, in the section about classes, you learned about constructors. In this lecture, we're going to learn more about constructors and inheritance. There are two things you need to know about constructors when it comes to inheritance. First is that during the instantiation of an object, the base class constructors are always executed first. And the second is, base class constructors are not inherited. So in a derived class, you need to redefine your constructors. It's easier to explain these with an example. So here we have a vehicle class with a private field called registration number. The vehicle class has a constructor that takes a parameter of type string called registration number. And we use this argument to initialize the private field here. Now let's say we would like to create a class that derives from vehicle. So our class can look like this: a car class that derives from vehicle. Note that I have redefined a constructor with a string parameter for the registration number here. The reason for that is, even though we defined a constructor in the vehicle class, it's not going to be inherited by the car class. So we need to redefine that constructor here. But what are we going to write in this constructor? Well, I've highlighted this line with red, which means this is not valid. In fact, if you write this code, it's not going to be compiled. You're going to get an error. Why? Because in the vehicle class, we declared registration number as private. Let's take a look at the vehicle class again. So note that the registration number is declared as private, which means it's not going to be accessible in the car class. And in the lecture about access modifiers, I explained why private is a better choice than protected. So back to our car class. At this point, we are not going to be able to access the registration number field, because it's the implementation detail of the base class, which is vehicle, which we would like to encapsulate in the vehicle class itself. So that detail is not leaked anywhere else in our program. Now, instead, if we declared that as protected, just let's say for argument's sake, we would be able to access that field here, but still it's not a good idea to initialize that field here, because we defined this concept somewhere else in the code, in the vehicle class's constructor. So we should not repeat ourselves. Instead, what we need to do here is to reuse that code we wrote in the vehicle class's constructor. How we do that is using the base keyword. So all we need to do here is, when declaring the constructor for the car class, before opening the body of the method here, we append colon, base, and here base is simply a way to access the base class. This syntax simply represents a method call. Imagine you're calling a method called base, and here you're passing an argument to that method. That method is simply the constructor of the vehicle class. So the constructor of the car class receives an argument called registration number, and here we simply pass it to the base class's constructor. And in the constructor of the car class here, we should write anything specific to the initialization of the car class itself. Okay, now let's start coding and see these concepts in action. Okay, I'm going to show you a few different things here. First, let's start by creating a vehicle class. So, public class vehicle. Let's create a default or parameterless constructor. So, ctor tab. And here we use console.writeLine to log a message to the console. So, cw tab. Vehicle is being initialized. Now let's define a car class that derives from vehicle. And again here, we define a constructor that simply logs a message to the console. So ctor tab console.writeLine, car is being initialized. Okay, now to clean up our code, we put these classes in separate files. So we go here, Alt and Enter, Enter, Control minus, back here. Again, one more time, back to program. Now here we create a car object. So var car equals new car. There you go. Let's run this application. Note that we got two messages on the console. First one is vehicle is being initialized, and the second one is car is being initialized. So what you see here is when you create an object, the constructor of the base class is always executed first. Okay, now let's extend this example and take a look at the base keyword. We go back to our vehicle class. So I'm going to leave this default constructor here, but I'm also going to create another constructor that takes a parameter called registration number. So ctor tab, this one is going to take a parameters. So string registration number. And here we can use Alt and Enter. And the first item is introduce and initialize field registration number. And as you see, what happens is ReSharper automatically creates a private read-only string field called registration number. If you like this kind of fast coding techniques, I have a course called Double Your Coding Speed, where I teach you lots of techniques to write code faster and easier. So back to our example here, the vehicle class has two constructors. One is default or parameterless, and the other one takes a parameter of type string. Now let's go to our car class. See, at this point, everything is fine. The reason for that is the vehicle class has a default or parameterless constructor. So we can create an object of type car, and at this point, first the default or parameterless constructor of the vehicle is executed, and then this constructor here will be executed. But let's see what happens if we go to the vehicle class and comment out this default constructor. Now back to our car class. Look, we got a red underline here. And the error is saying base class vehicle doesn't contain a parameterless constructor. What does this mean? Basically, what's happening here is when we create an object of type car, the runtime first tries to create an object of type vehicle. But because the vehicle type does not have a default or parameterless constructor, the runtime doesn't know how to create an object of type vehicle. So what we need to do here is, back to the car class, we use the base keyword to call one of the constructors of the vehicle class. And how we do it is very simple. Enter, colon, we use the base keyword, open brackets, and here we go. We have one constructor that takes a string parameter called registration number. Now at this point, we need to supply some value. We can simply hardcode something here, but it's not a good idea because we don't want to hardcode a registration number here. A better way is to receive a parameter called registration number in the car class's constructor. So here, string registration number, and whatever we receive here, we simply pass it to the base class. There you go. Now let's modify the message we log on the console to see the order of execution in more detail. So what I'm going to do is I simply add the registration number here. Registration number. And we do a similar technique in the vehicle class's constructor. Vehicle is being initialized, and here the parameter is going to be registration number. Let's run the application again. We had a build error. Let's see what's happening here. Double click here. Here the error says car does not contain a constructor that takes 0 arguments. So what's happening here is we changed the constructor of the car class to receive an argument, but here we forgot to supply one. So let's just add a registration number, XYZ1234. We run the application. Again, note that the vehicle is being initialized first and then the car is being initialized. And in both constructors, we receive a parameter, and that is what we passed here during instantiation of the car object. Well, that's pretty much it for this lecture. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for watching.